We have to start the qualitative aspect of research methodology. So this is the first session about qualitative research, introduction to qualitative research, right? So after completing this session, so you will understand how to explain why qualitative research is needed. So how to define qualitative research, describe key features of qualitative research, and difference between deductive and inductive approaches, right? Then explain key methodologies used in qualitative research and familiar with tools and techniques used in qualitative data collection and data analysis, right? So this is the introductory session to qualitative research, right? So I know you have learned a lot of things about quantitative research, right? So this today is the first session about qualitative research, right? Okay. So, so in this session, I need your participation. So without your participation, it's very difficult to explain qualitative side of research, right? Because you will understand the difference between quantitative and qualitative research. So qualitative research is bit different, right? I mean, so always we need your participation. So you have to answer to my questions, right? So let's look at the first thing, first activity. So you have to take few minutes, right? So even if I mention here 5 minutes, so within few minutes you can answer to this question. So you have to write down 2 reasons as to why you need to get to know more about qualitative research, right? So you have to write 2 reasons why you need qualitative research, why you need to know about qualitative research. So please write down, take 2-3 minutes. 2 minutes is enough. So write down why you need qualitative research. So I will ask everyone, so why you need a qualitative research. So Nirosha says, for some research, we cannot address the problem only with quantitative research. Yes, acceptable, right? So there may be other reasons, right? So this is also one reason. So some aspects you cannot answer through quantitative research, some issues. Okay. What else? Yes, some problems cannot be done through quantitative research, such as case studies, narratives. Okay. Others? Hetiheva, can you tell Hetiheva? BJ Hetiheva, can you tell what is your idea? Why you need qualitative research? So when I ask, please respond, right? So because it's a very boring, because we have to talk about lot of things, theoretical things, right? So because no calculations here, so always we have to explain the things, right? So Hetiheva, so there is a student called BJ Hetiheva, right? So can you tell what is the reason for doing qualitative research? Okay. Qualitative research. Can't you talk? Can you please talk? So you don't need to switch on the cameras. Just talk without. Darshani, Iresha, can you tell what do you understand? So I need people to talk.
uh, provide the in-depth understanding of the way people comes to understand.
Okay, so you says in from qualitative research you can understand in depth about a particular research issue, right?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So what else? So any other person? Can you talk, please? Okay. So anyone?
Provide theories and concepts.
Provide theories and concepts. So theory, yes. So that is the main idea about it's a because deductive and inductive approaches. So you may have studied in Ajit's lessons, right? So in inductive approach means so you have to derive theories and concepts through the data that you studied. So that is the main idea behind qualitative research, right? So, in simply, so what you need, what do you need from qualitative research? So as earlier students mentioned, so if you want to study a particular issue in depth, then we have to go with qualitative research, right? So another student says, so some issues you cannot answer through quantitative studies. Then we have to go with qualitative studies. So likewise, in simple terms, so why do you need qualitative research? So if you talk, so this will be a, I mean, interactive session, right? So please talk, Madhava.
Yes, madam. Quantitative research is more about the facts. That mean the numbers
Hmm.
actually.
Hmm.
But in qualitative research, we deeply analyze the observations, behaviors that sometimes if related to the matter like norms, beliefs, values, those kind of things. Even we are understanding in the
Very good. Yes.
quantitative one.
Yes. So quantitative research deals with numbers, but in qualitative research, so you have to explain words. So everything you have to explain in words. So you don't deal with numbers. As Madhava mentioned, so always you can study behaviors, patterns, right? So explanations, their ambitions. So everything, so you have to explain through words. But in quantitative research, so maybe you learn those things in Ajit sir's sessions or Professor Kennedy's sessions. So always you try to explain things through using numbers, right? So that is another thing, right? Good. So I can explain so an answer to this question like this, right? So he is a very good, I mean, the well-known researcher. So he explained why we need a qualitative research in this way. I want to understand the world from your point of view, right? So when you do a qualitative research, right? So understand this one very clearly, right? So you cannot explain the things the way you see it, right? So you have to see the particular issue or particular phenomena from the point of view the persons involved in that setting, right? So therefore, that's why it says, I want to understand the world from your point of view, right? So maybe in a particular research setting, there are few people. So you have to see the particular issue from the eyes of the people who involved in that setting. So that is one thing. So in qualitative research, so the people's point of view, the people that you are going to research, so the people's point of view is very important, right? And here another point is, I want to know what you know in the way you know it, right? So I want to know what you know in the way you know it, right? The way you know it is the important thing, not the way I know it, right? So therefore, he says, I want to know what you know the way you know it. I want to understand the meaning of your experience, to walk in your shoes, to feel things as you feel them, to explain things as you explain them. So you can see how deep the qualitative research, right? So it's not a surface level. So you have to study how the people feel them, right? So that's why it says, I want to need your experience. I want to walk in your shoes because I want to feel how you feel, right? So therefore, it's a kind of a deep thing, right? So qualitative research means, so it's not a surface level. So you have to study a particular research issue in depth, right? So that's what explained here. So why you need a qualitative research? Because you want to study a particular phenomena from the point of view of the participants involved in this setting. And you want to feel a particular issue, the people who experience in that setting, right? So that's why here it says, I want to walk in your shoes, because you want to feel the experience they feel it, right? So therefore, it's kind of, so it's a kind of in-depth examination, right? So this is the answer for this. So your idea is also important, what you said, right? So, but, so this is, right, more than it, right? To understand why we need a qualitative research, right? Clear? Okay. So did you understand this statement? Right. So then, as you mentioned, so we can explain one by one why we need a qualitative research, right? So why qualitative research is important, right? So here it says, to address the methodological problems of positivism, limiting everything to hypothesis test based on statistical analysis. So Mayura, can you mute your phone, please? Hetty Heva also need to mute the phone, right? Okay. So the first point is, it says to address the methodological problems of positivism. Because you know, so you have studied up to today the quantitative studies, right? So it's positivism. So always you limit to hypothesis, right? So you limit to hypothesis. So first you hypothesize particular research issue based on hypothesis, right? So you try to fulfill whether this hypothesis is significant or not, acceptable or not, right? So there are certain issues, methodological issues of positivism. So to address the issues of positivism, so we need a qualitative research, right? Because in qualitative research, we don't we don't believe hypothesis, right? So we don't derive hypothesis, right? So instead of hypothesis, we come up with propositions, right? So there are certain methodological problems in positivism. To address the issues, so we need a qualitative research. So that is one thing. Then the next one is to study unique context which cannot be generalized statistically. So in quantitative studies, so you always try to generalize a particular setting, right? So using a sample, right? So for an example, if you want to study the relationship between corporate governance and performance of the organization, you consider a population, and from the population you select a sample, and then you say you generalize the findings of your sample to the population, right? But in qualitative studies, you cannot do that, right? So you cannot generalize a particular research issue, particular research context to a population, right? Because in qualitative research, if you select a particular research context, so it is only related to that context. You cannot generalize those findings to other people or other settings, right? So that is another important thing. So to study the unique context, which cannot be generalized statistically, so you have to go with qualitative research, right? Then to report on deep insights of a phenomena in details of both theoretical and practical purposes. So if you want to study a particular research issue in depth, then you have to go with qualitative study. And the other one is to develop new theories or to challenge the existing theories, right? Then you have to go with qualitative study, right? So if you want to develop a new theory or to challenge the existing theories, so then you have to go with qualitative studies. And other point is to make studies interdisciplinary while knowing something broadly, deeply, and beyond our disciplinary boundaries, right? So if you want to study accounting with IT, if you want to study management accounting with political sciences or economic conditions or IT, so or HR or any other discipline, then you have to go with qualitative studies, right? So if you want to study interdisciplinary study, then you have to go with qualitative study. Okay, clear? Okay, so one thing is to address the methodological problems of positivism. So because some things that you cannot study through hypothesis, right? So therefore, you have to go with qualitative research. Then the second one is, so if you want to study a unique context, which you cannot generalize, then you have to go with qualitative study. Then the other one is, if you want to study a particular phenomena, particular research issue in depth, then you have to go with qualitative studies. Then the other one is, if you want to develop a new theory or to challenge the theory which exists, then go with qualitative research. Then to do interdisciplinary studies, right? So that means you want to study a particular area, right? Broadly. That's why you go with interdisciplinary studies. You study accounting with another area, marketing or HR or economics. So you go with other disciplines, right? So then you have to better to go with qualitative research. So those are the reasons why we need a qualitative research, right? Clear?
Yes, madam. Yes, madam.
Then So these are the definitions for qualitative research, right? So there are different types of definitions which you could find in different books, right? So here it says qualitative research involves an interpretative, naturalistic approach to the world, right? Interpretative. So you always interpret what is happening there. Then naturalistic approach, right? So because when you do a qualitative research, so you have to go to a research setting, right? So it's a kind of a naturalistic approach to the world. Then this means the qualitative researchers study things in their natural settings, attempting to make sense of or to interpret phenomena in terms of meanings people bring to them, right? That is another way. Then the way in which people being studied understand and interpret their social reality is one of the central motives of qualitative research, right? So if you study the people's behavior, their social behaviors, social realities, so then you have to interpret them, right? So then that is, you understand and interpret their social reality. Then by the term qualitative research, we mean any type of research that produce findings not arrived at by statistical procedure or other means of quantification. So in qualitative research, so you don't use statistical procedures and you don't quantify your findings, right? So you always explain through words, through sentences, right? Through words. Words is important in qualitative research. So these are the different explanations given by different textbook writers, right? So you can understand the difference between quantitative research and qualitative research, right? Okay. Clear? So we have to study this aspect very slowly, right? So you have to understand everything, every word clearly, right? So therefore, if you feel you can't understand a particular situation or particular aspect, so please let me know. You can answer at that point, right? Okay. So next one is inductive view. So features of qualitative research. So this is very important, right? Put an asterisk mark for your slide. So this is very important. Features of qualitative research. So first one is inductive view of relationship between theory and research. So as one student explained, so why we need a qualitative research? Because from the qualitative research, we try to develop theories and concepts from the data that you derive, right? So for an example, maybe you want to study a particular situation. So then you go to that setting and you collect data from that setting, and from the data you try to come up with a concept or theories, right? So inductive view means that, because inductive view does not start with a theory. Inductive view means you derive theories from the data that you have, right? So that is other way of deductive method, because in deductive method, in quantitative study, you start from the theory, right? You test the theory. You test the theory using the data. But here you come up with the theory, you come up with the theory using your data, right? So inductive view means inductive view of relationship between theory and research. So theories and concepts emerge from data. So that is what explained here. That is the first thing, right? So in qualitative research, so inductive view is very important. What is inductive view? Inductive view means theories and concepts emerge from the data, right? Then the next one, interpretivist epistemology. Interpretivist epistemology. So in your notebook, please write down this word, only this word, epistemology. Write down this word, epistemology. So in the notebook or in your slides, so write down epistemology, right? So then, so you have written epistemology, only that word, right? So I'm going to explain that word, right? So this part in that word, this part, epistemo, so that's mean knowledge. Write down that one, that's mean knowledge. Then the other part, ology. Ology means science or study. Science or study. Write down these things, right? Epistemo means knowledge. Ology means science or study. So under that, write in general, study of knowledge. Study of knowledge. Or science of knowing knowledge. Science of knowing knowledge. In general, so epistemology means study of knowledge or science of knowing knowledge. So these words are very important, right? So interpretivist epistemology means understanding of the social world through the interpretations of the participants. So epistemology means, so you understand the world through the explanations given or through the interpretations of the research participants, right? So for an example, so the good example is, so late Professor Ratnapala, so did a study about beggars, right? So he spent, according to my knowledge, so he spent maybe 6 years with beggars, right? Because he wanted to study the lifestyle of beggars, right? Through experience. So therefore, he also pretended that he's a beggar and lived with beggars so many years, and he studied their lifestyle, right? So understanding the social world through the interpretations of the participants. So the Professor Ratnapala, so he also as a beggar, and he observed what is happening there, right? So then he can easily interpret their lifestyle, right? So write down the example, study the life of beggars. So under this, you can write the example as study the life of beggars. Study the life of beggars, right? So this is another feature of qualitative research. So you understand the social world through the interpretations of the research participants, right? So not what you see, right? So you have to see the particular issue through the eyes of research participants, right? So that is interpretivist epistemology. Then the third point is constructionist ontology. So did you understand this point? Any questions regarding this? Students?
Madam, can you explain again? I didn't get it.
Sorry?
Epistemology. I didn't get, madam. Can you explain again?
Okay, so epistemology, so if you take it as a word, epistemology is a Greek term, right? So ology means always study or science. Epistemo means knowledge. So epistemology means, so you study the knowledge, study of knowledge or study of knowing knowledge, right? So interpretivist epistemology means you interpret or you study, you understand the social world through the interpretations given by the research participants, right? So you have to clear about this, right? So in qualitative research, researcher is here, research participants is here, right? So you are not a member of this group, right? To understand the behaviors, patterns, or their beliefs. So you have to be a participant of this research setting. So that's what Professor Nandasena Ratnapala did. So because you cannot understand their behavior if you are in a far away from their research site. So therefore you have to be with them, right? ඒගොල්ලන් එක්කම හැසිරෙන්න ඕනේ. ඒ රිසර්ච් සෙටින් එකටම ඔයා යන්න ඕනේ. හරි, එතකොට රිසර්ච් අයි මේ රිසර්ච් සෙටින් එකයි ඈඩ් වෙලා තියෙන්න බෑ. හරි, ඒකයි මෙතන කියන්නේ you try to understand the social world through the interpretations given by the research participants. So research participants are here. Research ඈත ඉන්න බෑ. Research අත් මෙතනටම ගිහින් තමයි ඒක දැනගන්න ඕනේ. ඒකයි මෙතන කියන්නේ. So I think now you are clear.
Yes, madam. Thank you.
Okay. Then the other one is constructionist ontology. So ontology also a Greek term. So you have to write down this word separately, right? So ontro means existence. මෙන්න මේ කැලල ontro means existence. Ontro means existence, right? Or being real. Write down existence or being real. So ology means, as I mentioned earlier, study or science. Study or science. Right? Also write down, so ontology means study of what exists. Study of what exists. Study of what exists. Study of what exists. Or study the reality. Or study the reality. Right? So here, so in simple, so you try to understand the actual knowledge. What is happening really, right? So you are going to study the reality, right? What is happening really, or study what exists, right? So constructionist ontology means social properties are outcomes of the interactions between individuals. Because, you know, reality is a complex thing, right? Reality is a complex thing, right? So you may find, so valid, equal observations about the reality, right? So reality, it's a complex one. So when you try to study the reality, so there may be valid reasons from different angles, right? ඒ කියන්නේ මම හිතන දේ හරි වෙන්න පුළුවන්. නමුත් ඔයා හිතන දේත් හරි වෙන්න පුළුවන්. මොකද අපි බලන්නේ different angles වලින්, right? Because you are looking a particular situation from a different perspective. So therefore reality is a complex situation, right? So I can explain this one using this, right? So reality is here it says reality can be so complex that equally valid observations from differing perspectives can appear to be contradictory. So you can see, so this person says, right? So there are 4 bars, right? So if you look at from this person's perspective, so actually there are 4 bars. But if you look at from this person's angle, this person's perspective, here it has only 3, right? So from this also, this is correct. From this person's perspective also, this is correct. So that's why here it says, so reality is complex situation. So you have to look at from the people who see the particular issue from his angle, right? So they are otherwise, so different persons' angles, so the same situation may be correct, right? But if you see from this person's angle, this is correct. The other person's angle, that is also correct. So the reality is a complex situation. Reality is a complex situation. So maybe these reasons are valid, but contradictory. These reasons are valid. මෙයාගේ පැත්තෙනුත් මේක හරි. මෙයාගේ පැත්තෙනුත් මේක හරි. නමුත් මේක contradictory එකක්. නේ? Contradictory situation එක. So in qualitative research, right? So social properties are outcomes of the interactions between individuals, right? So reality is a complex situation, right? So you have to study the reality, right, from the outcomes or interactions that you gain through individuals, right? So that's how you have to see that situation, right? So otherwise, so there may be valid reasons from this person and that person, but there is a contradictory issue. So therefore, you have to believe that social properties are outcomes of interaction between individuals. So then only you have to study the situation, because constructionist ontology means you have to study what exists, what is the reality, right? So what is happening there? What is the real situation? So that is what explained by qualitative research. And the other point is, so you explain, you emphasize words rather than numbers. So you explained that one earlier, right? So in qualitative research, you explain a particular situation using words, not using numbers. And when you do a qualitative research, so there are diversity of approaches, and also you can discuss how the qualitative research differ from quantitative research. So those are the important features of qualitative research. So these 3 are very important, right? These 3 are very important. So these things actually you know because you have studied quantitative research up to today, right? But these 3 are very important. So inductive view means theories and concepts emerge from data, right? So in qualitative research, you don't start from theory. You start from data gathering. So from the data, you try to come up with the concept or you try to come up with the theory. That is inductive view. That is the main feature of qualitative research. Then the second point is interpretivist epistemology means, so you have to understand the social world through the eyes of research participants, not what you see. You have to explain what the research participants explain, what the research participants see. So you have to explain you have to explain a particular situation through the eyes of the participants you observe, right? That is the second point. Then the third point is constructionist ontology means, so social properties are outcomes of the interactions between individuals. So that means the social reality is very complex, right? Reality is complex. So you have to study a particular research issue and explain it, right? So that's why here it says social properties are outcomes of interactions between individuals, right? So how the people interact, how they see, right? So from that, you have to explain the social reality, social properties, right? So those are the very important points in
Excuse me, madam. So that we have to explain that both age from that participant age and that our view that in that third concept we have to explain the both ways like that.
Yes, because one side is, so interpretive epistemology means, so when you study a qualitative research issue, so you have to look a particular research issue from the point of your research participants. And the next point, constructionist ontology means, so you have to believe the social properties. So for an example, we'll say, so this behavior occurred because of this, right? So this situation, right? So for an example, how to say, අපි හිතමු අපි හිතමු ඒ කියන්නේ social properties කියන්නේ දැන් මේ මෙතන social properties කියන්නේ මෙතන ආපු outcome එකක්. අපි හිතමු ප්‍රොෆෙසර් නන්දසේන රත්නපාලගේ study එකේ එයා මොනා හරි කියනවා මේ beggars ලගේ behavior එකේ මොනා හරි finding එකක් එයා කියනවා කියලා. හරි. අපි හිතමුකෝ එයා කියනවා කියලා මම ඇත්තෙන්ම ඒ study එක නෙමෙයි අපි හිතමුකෝ එයා කියනවා මේගොල්ලන් ඇත්තෙන්ම මේකෙන් ගැලවෙන්න, ඒ කියන්නේ bigger කියන life එකෙන් ගැලවෙන්න එයා ඒගොල්ලන් එච්චර කැමති නෑ කියන එක කියන finding එකට ආවා කියමුකෝ. හරි? So that is the finding, that is the outcome. So that outcome he judged through the interaction between individuals. Clear? ඒ outcome එකට ඇවිල්ලා තියෙන්නේ අර behaviors අරයා එක එක්කෙනා තුලින් study කිරීම හරහා. එන්නේ ඒකයි social property එකක් කියන්නේ. කියන්නේ අපේ social property කියන්නේ අපේ outcome එක. ඒ outcome එකට අපි ඇවිල්ලා තියෙන්නේ අරගොල්ලන් ඇති වෙච්ච interactions එක්ක ඒගොල්ලන්ව දැකලා ඒගොල්ලන්ගේ behavior ඒගොල්ලන්ව interview කරලා ඒගොල්ලන් එක කතා කරනවා ඒ වගේ. ඒක අනිත් point එක. එකක් අපි දකින විදිය, එකක් අරගොල්ලන්ගේ interactions තුලින් අපි ගොඩනගා ගන්න. හරි?
Okay. Yes. Thank you.
Clear?
Yes, madam.
මේ ටික නම් ඔයගොල්ලන් දන්නවනේ words තමයි important මේකේ ගොඩක් approaches තියෙනවා. මේක quantitative studies වලින් වෙනස් වෙනවා. එතකොට so what you have to remember here is, so in qualitative research, so there are no sequential order, right? So in quantitative research, so you have a clear steps, right? So you have a theory. So based on the theory, you derive certain hypotheses, then you collect data, then you come up with findings, then you interpret it. Right? So there are, in qualitative research, so you don't clear cut of the process, right? So we will learn that one later, the process. But so these 3 points are very important, right? So one thing is theories, concepts derived or emerge from data. Then you understand the social world through the interpretations given by your research participants. Then the other one is social properties. Social properties means the outcomes, your findings, right? Social properties are outcomes of the interactions between individuals, right? So how individuals behave, how they see it, right? So in this connection, in this one, right? So this person sees there are 4 bars, but he sees only 3 bars, right? So you know from this person's view, this is correct. And the other person's view also, that is correct. But it's a contradictory thing, right? But you have to come up with a real outcome, right? So you have to study these interactions. You have to study these interactions, right? Maybe conflicting things you have to study. And then you come up with the outcome, right? මෙයාගේ perspective එකෙනුත් හිතන්න ඕනවා, මෙයාගේ පැත්තෙනුත් හිතන්න ඕනේ. එහෙම හිතලා මේ interactions ගැන හිතලා තමයි ඔයා outcome එකකට එන්න ඕනේ. Right? That is what mentioned here. Okay, clear? Okay. Then first we look at what is inductive approach. I explained it, inductive approach. So inductive view begins with an issue or interest, hunch. Right? So inductive view කියන එක ඇති වෙන්නේ දැන් quantitative study එක, right? Quantitative study එක නම් ඕගලන්ට කෙලින්ම research question එක decide කරන්න පුළුවන්. Right? So for an example, so you want to find out the relationship between corporate governance මොන හරි factors with performance, right? So that is your question. So then you have to collect data about corporate governance and you have to collect data about performance. So you can easily decide your research question, research issue. But in inductive view, so you actually at the first step, you don't have a real research issue. So you have a research interest. So that is we call hunch. Hunch එකක් කියන්නේ අපි කුතුහලයක්. යම්කිසි කුතුහලයකින් තමයි ඔය qualitative study එක start කරන්නේ. Right? The inductive view begins with an issue of interest. So that is hunch. ඒ කියන්නේ කුතුහලයකින් තමයි පටන් ගන්න. මම මේ corporate governance පැත්තේ මෙන්න මේ දේ හෙව්වොත් හොඳයි කියන නිකන් එනවා. ඔයා කෙලින්ම ඔයා relationship එකක් හිතන්නේම නැහැ. ඔයා හිතනවා corporate governance වල මෙන්න මේ issues තියෙනවා, මේ පැත්ත මං හෙව්වොත් හොඳයිද කියලා නිකන් අර hunch එකකින් තමයි කුතුහලයකින් තමයි ඔයා පටන් ගන්න. Right? Then so based on the research interest, researcher then proceeds to gather data in the form of observations with a view to testing the validity of hunch. So based on your research interest, so you try to gather data, right? So you don't follow a kind of a methodological way of collecting data. You just collect data, maybe interviewing few people, maybe observe particular research site, right? Maybe referring to some sort of articles, some sort of maybe explanations given by interviewees, maybe some video clips about that, right? So you just gather data. So not a methodological way, right? So researcher then gather data. This is followed by an analysis of observations for patterns, similarities, and regularities that will lead to tentative propositions, right? So based on the gathered data, right? So you categorize your observation, maybe, so this observation goes with this pattern. This data have similarities, right? So likewise, you categorize your data. You categorize your data, right? Then based on that data, based on the behaviors, based on the patterns, based on the similarities, you can come up with propositions, right? Or quantitative එකේ අපි හදන hypothesis වගේ මේකේදී අපිට propositions කියලා දෙයක් හදන්න පුළුවන්, right? අපි ඒක හදන්නේ දැන් quantitative studies වලින් තන අපි මුලින්මනේ කරන්නේ. අපි මෙතනදී data gather කරලා similar patterns, similar behaviors, right? Similar observations. ඒ මත තමයි මේ propositions හදන්නේ, right? Then further observation received in support of propositions over time, result in developing theory, right? So this takes a bottom-up approach. Thus, no hypothesis can be put forward at the initial stages, and the researcher cannot predict his finding, right? So the another important thing is, so at the first stage, so you cannot predict your findings, right? You cannot predict your finding. But in quantitative studies, so if you take this one, so if you want to find out relationship between corporate governance, certain characteristics with the organization performance, so you can predict with there can be positive relationship or there can be negative relationship. You can predict, maybe positive, maybe negative. But here in qualitative research, you cannot predict your findings. You cannot predict your findings, right? So that is we call inductive approach. So it starts from hunch, then you collect data based on your research interest, then you decide these are the patterns, these are the similarities, these are the behaviors, these are the observations. You come up with those things. So based on those things, you decide your propositions. Then using the propositions, you can sometimes develop a concept or a theory. So therefore, it's a bottom-up approach, not a top-down approach, right? So therefore, here no hypothesis, and here you cannot predict your findings at the beginning, right? So that is we call inductive approach. Clear? පැහැදිලිද? Okay. So difference between deductive and inductive approach. So, you know, deductive approach start from theory, but inductive approach start from observations. So, right? So you have to collect data. So based on the finding, you have to decide your theory or concept, right? First you come up with concepts, then theory, right? So you can see the difference between deductive and inductive approaches, right? Okay, so now you have some sort of idea about qualitative research, right? So you know, so what are the main features of qualitative research, right? So why we need a qualitative research, you know? So based on that knowledge, so formulate a research question which suitable for a qualitative research, right? So everyone should formulate a research question. So randomly I will ask you, right? So formulate a research question, take 2-3 minutes. Can someone answer? So, any volunteers first? You can ask. You can tell your research question. So, anyone? Then I will call names, right? So if you don't. Then I am Tika. So what is your research question?
Madam, how digital transformation affects organizational culture?
Okay, so that is a good one. So it says how digital transformation,
Affects organizational culture.
that is a good one. So you can explain how, right? So how digital transformation impact on organizational culture. So you cannot do that type of research using quantitative study because it says how, right? So you have to answer how, right? So how, so you have to study what is happening there and you have to interview how it is happening there. So that type of things you cannot explain through numbers, right? So that is a good question. Okay, so then Basuru, what is your question? බාසුරු කියන කෙනා ඉන්නවද නැද්ද? මම answers දෙන්න නැති අයව ලියා ගන්නවා හොඳේ. Then Charuni, can you explain your question?
Yes, madam. That I am thinking that first we have to do observation and collecting data, analyze the data, and select design research. After that, developing the theory like that.
No, no. So that is the process that you have to follow. So I'm asking a research issue. So what you want to study using qualitative research? I'm asking a research. So as earlier student Ayanti mentioned, so I need a research issue or a research question, right? So think about it. Okay, any other volunteers? Can you explain?
What factors that students to pursue a master's degree?
What factors? So that is not a qualitative one. So what factors? So you can find the factors. So using quantitative study, right? So you can give a questionnaire, right? So then you can get the factors. Clear what I said? So it's not a in-depth study. So what factors mean? So you just need to know what are the factors, right? So if you want to do a qualitative study, so it should be an in-depth study. Clear? Okay. What else?
Madam, how many students using in our libraries?
නෑ, ඒකත් පුතා quantitative. So how many students? So you can take the answer in quantitative way, no? Right? So in qualitative research, so you don't want those type of things, right? So you want to study a particular phenomena in depth in qualitative. So how many students? So you can get it in numbers. So it's a quantitative study.
Okay.
What else? Oh, දැන් මේ පිරිමි ළමයි කවුරුත් කතා කරන්නේ. මාධව?
Qualitative one, that the relationship between East attack impact and the religious groups behavior in Sri Lanka.
Relationship between?
East attack impact and the religious groups behaviors in Sri Lanka.
ඒකනේ පුතා දැන් ඔතන බෑනේ. So if it is a relationship, right? So that is quantitative. Right?
But how kind of a this kind, that mean now the relation that this kind of a thing, then East attack impact, because of the East attack impact the religious group activities, but we can't count like that. So actually the fact things no we can explain, madam.
But when you write quantitative research issue, so you don't write
Yeah.
right? So maybe you can write it in different way. So maybe so what factors influence or understand? So something like that. So if you use relationship,
That goes to the
that goes,
quantitative.
yes. So you can formulate the same issue in qualitative form. Right?
That means if I correct it, then how the East attack impact to the victims family.
Yes. That's how. How, if you use how, then that's mean you have to study in depth. So you're not studying the surface level. Right? So if you use the term relationship, so it's more towards to quantitative studies. Okay?
Thank you.
Laksiri, do you have any question? Laksiri Kumara? Mayura?
Ma'am, how work stress can change the employee behaviors?
That is okay. Okay. Right. Nipuni?
Madam, the influence of working capital to profitability of company?
Quantitative. So impact. So you are going to study the impact, no? So it's quantitative.
How important is the concept of sustainability reporting for the Sri Lankan companies?
Yes, that is okay. Okay, so now you can see, so when you form your research question, so in qualitative research, so always you have to deal with how and why terms, right? So that's what I want to get through you, right? So normally if you ask a question using how, then it has a qualitative nature. And also if it is a why it is happening there, right? What are the, not what, why it is happening there. So that is also searching in depth. Why means, why and how are normally we using qualitative research when formulating the research questions, right? Okay, so now I think you, okay, so we'll see the chat boxes. Okay, how digital transformation affects organization, that is okay. Traveling increases the problem solving ability of, so what is the question here? So you have to form a question from this, idea. Then how sustainable business practices affect companies' financial performance, okay. How do board members' roles and responsibilities promoting effective corporate governance, okay. How has working from home during COVID-19 changed how people balance, okay. How much fast food do Sri Lanka consume? Ek bag. How much? That is quantitative. How much? Right? So how do cultural factors influence the habits of immigrants in new country? Okay, maybe you have searched these things. So anyway, what you have to understand is, so you can't use relationship, that one, right? So then the how, what, how many, so those things more towards to quantitative, right? Okay. Okay, good. Then the next one, so these are the qualitative research methods or methodologies, right? So we have basic interpretative qualitative research, right? And also like phenomenology, so that is explore and understand individuals' lived experience and the essence of these experience. So for that, I want to give some examples to you. So that is very important, right? Phenomenology means, so you understand individuals' lived experiences and the essence of these experiences, as I mentioned here, explore and understand individuals' lived experiences and the essence of these experiences, right? So please write down few examples, right? So experience of every war survivor, experience of war survivor. So it's a unique one, right? So you don't find that experience from everyone. So it's a unique experience. So phenomenology means, so it's a kind of unique experience which experience through people, right? So it's one thing, right? Experience of every war survivor. Then another good example is experience of cancer patient who is undergoing a major surgery. Experience of a cancer patient, right? Who is undergoing a major surgery. Then, so those are unique experiences, or maybe experience of cancer patient undergoing chemotherapy, right? So those are not common things, right? So you will find So unique experiences through them, right? Then maybe the experience of a patient who is suffering from a chronic pain, right? Maybe the experience of a first time motherhood, right? So those things we can categorize as a phenomenology studies, right? So those are unique experiences. So you cannot find those experiences from others, right? So therefore, phenomenology studies are unique, right? So you can find unique experiences from phenomenology studies, right? So that's why I gave those examples, right? So the experience of a mother who after a first delivery, so it's a unique experience, right? So experience of a patient who is having a kind of a chronic pain, then experience of a cancer patient who is undergoing a surgery, maybe he may also maybe who is doing a chemotherapy. So, so those are unique experiences. Phenomenology is that, right? Then the grounded theory is another one. So you know what is grounded theory. Grounded theory means so you develop a theory or concept using the data that you derive from your research participants, right? So that is the inductive view. Grounded theory is coming through the inductive view. Then the case study. Case study. So Nuansa will explain about case study research in detail, right? Case study is also a research method that we use in qualitative studies. And the ethnographic study. Ethnographic study is a very, popular method used in qualitative studies. So I will explain it in detail next, right? Then narrative studies and critical research. So those are different types of research methodologies used in qualitative studies. So let's look at, so these are methods. So next question is prepare a list of data collection techniques that can be used in qualitative research. So tell me what are the data collection methods that you could use in qualitative research? Because you know what are the data collection methods in quantitative studies, right? Survey study. So what are the methods used in qualitative studies to collect data? Okay, interview.
Questionnaires.
Uh,
Questionnaires.
Questionnaires, normally we use questionnaires we use in quantitative studies, right? Because in questionnaires, you can just find out the surface level. You cannot find out the in-depth through the questionnaires. So therefore, you have to interview in detail. You want to get the answer. So therefore, yes, focus group is correct, right? Observations is correct. Interviews. Okay. What did you say, Pruta?
Field work.
Hmm?
Field work.
Yes, field study. Field study, you have to go to the field and you can observe. So that is another way. Okay. So you know what are the methods that you can use in qualitative studies, right? Then we'll look at ethnography in detail, right? Ethnography. Sometimes we call participation observation. Participation observation. Yes, you can do document analysis in qualitative research, right? Okay. Okay, ethnography. So please write down this note. So in separate paper. So you tend to do ethnography. You tend to do ethnography when you are not clear about. You tend to do ethnography when you are not clear about what is happening. What is happening? or some areas unusual or under-researched or novel, right? So you do ethnographic studies, right? So if you don't know what is happening there, because when you do a qualitative study, so you have to select a research site, right? So you do ethnographic or participation observation if you are not aware of what is happening there, right? So what Professor Nandasena Ratnapala did was ethnographic study, right? So he went to the research site. And he participate or he pretend that he is a beggar and he studied their behaviors, right? So you tend to do, the ethnographic studies when you are not clear about what is happening there. So in other words, the areas which is unusual, under-researched or novel, right? So that is the first point, right? So ethnography is done in natural setting. Another point is ethnography is done in natural setting. So it could be home, it could be a street, it could be a factory, right? So you do an ethnographic studies in a natural setting. ඒක වෙන්න පුළුවන් ගෙදරක් වෙන්න පුළුවන් පාරක් වෙන්න පුළුවන් factory එකක් වෙන්න පුළුවන් ඕනම තැනක් you can do the ethnographic study, right? So ethnography is done in natural setting. So most important method used in ethnography is direct observation, right? Direct observation is very important. The most important method used in ethnography is direct observation. So write down that one. Direct observation. Most important method used in ethnography is direct observation. So you become the part of the setting. Then you become the part of the setting. You become the part of the setting. So that's mean, so you go to the setting, you observe it, and you take part of the setting, right? So if you do the ethnographic study, so you have to go to the setting, right? You observe what is happening there, then you become a part of the study, right? Or part of the setting, right? So there are two types of participation observation or direct observation. So overt and covert. Overt and covert. Overt and covert. So overt means you know the researcher. You know the researcher. Overt means you know the researcher. Covert means you don't know the researcher. Right? So write down here overt, known. Known. Covert, secret. Covert means secret. So here you know the researcher. Here you don't know the researcher. Maybe, so under this right, maybe you are a co-worker of the research setting. You pretend that you are a co-worker of this research setting, right? So those are the two methods. Overt and covert. Overt means known, covert means secret. So secret means, so you pretend that you are a co-worker. අර නන්දසේන රත්නපාල කරා වගේ එයා beggar කෙනෙක් හැටියට pretend කරා, right? So he is a researcher but he cover, right? So secretly he observed what is happening there. Okay, so those are the main points under ethnography. So you do ethnographic studies when you don't know what is happening in the research setting. So areas which is under-researched, right? Unusual and novel. You can අලුත්ම දෙයක් වෙන්න පුළුවන්, unusual එකක් වෙන්න පුළුවන්, under-research area එකක් වෙන්න පුළුවන්. එතකොට අපි ethnographic studies කරනවා. Then other point is, so ethnography is done in natural setting, right? Maybe home, maybe a street, right? Maybe in a factory, right? Maybe in anywhere you can do a ethnographic study. And in ethnographic studies, so you have to go to the research setting, you have to observe, then you are become a part of that setting, right? So that is participation, observation. So in ethnographic studies, there are two methods. Overt. Overt means the people know that you are a researcher. Covert means people don't know that you are a research. So secretly you do your research work, right? So you pretend that you are a co-worker, right? So those are the two methods. That is about ethnography, right? So next, we have to watch a video, and you have to decide whether these researchers are overt or covert, right? So I will show that video after the break, right? So now the time is 1:30. So we will take 15 to 20 minutes break. So how many minutes you want the break? 15 or 20 minutes? Only the gang leader knows about the researcher. Others doesn't know about the researcher. Okay, right, correct. Then
doing work
second
there.
case.
And using similar techniques, living in the towns and villages and so on they were studying. But William Foote White, probably the first one to do this in the United States, in a sense, in the country from which the ethnographers came, in this case, the States. I think it dates to about 1927, I think something like that. So it's between the two world wars. And he was looking at, well, it's a title says Street Corner Society. Again, this was not so much gang culture, although it did involve gangs. This was groups of youths of a suburb of the town, which were basically they were Italian immigrants and the sons and daughters of Italian immigrants. So an Italian kind of subsector of the city. And again, he got into it in this case, I think just by hanging around. His background was middle class, very different from the kids he was studying, or the youths he was studying. And he just hung around to begin with and got to know them and eventually was accepted in, but accepted in a different way. He never really kind of covered up for the fact that he was different, or even necessarily that he was studying them. He didn't make it that obvious, but he didn't keep it a big secret either. There were people who knew that he was doing some kind of research, but they didn't know much about it. On the other hand, he had to be careful just what he did do. And again, he got into similar kinds of problems with the gang culture that he was encountering. But a classic study that came up with the idea of the fact that certain kinds of individuals, the young kids in his group, were kind of separated from the major culture of the United States, which is all about achievement and education and so on. That's what most young boys and girls were doing. But what this group was doing was a separate kind of subculture with its own kind of criteria for doing well. Lord Humphreys, another.
Okay, so in second case, what about whether the people knew about the research or not? Can't you hear clearly? Are you referring to the video or my voice? The volume is rising. My voice, can't you hear clearly? Can you hear now? No, right. Okay, so tell me about the second video. So whether the people knew about the research or not? Okay, so let's look at the third one. If you can't understand, can't find the second case. So look at this one, the third case, right?
American researcher, some years later, group was doing was a separate kind of subculture with its own kind of criteria for doing well.
The third one.
Lord Humphreys, another American researcher, some years later, this was after the Second World War, a classic study of a quite different kind. The tea room trade, if you're American, you may know what tea room is. In British English, it's called cottaging. And cottaging is something which homosexual men do to try to get some kind of sexual encounter. Usually, in his case, it was done inside men's toilets. So the idea was to study homosexual men and their sexual encounters inside men's toilets, public toilets, that is. And he did it by, again, I think he was entirely covert. Nobody knew he was doing the research. But he did it by gradually getting to know people, hanging around, you might say, to begin with, and then taking on the role of a what is it? I can't remember the term they use now, but someone who watches out, basically, who stands around by the entrance of the toilets and coughs loudly if a policeman comes by or somebody else comes by who might give things away, while others are getting on with their sexual encounters in the toilets. What he did was, as I say, entirely covert. The people he was looking at and studying didn't know this was going on. But what he also did that caused a huge furore was that after he'd observed these activities, these encounters, I don't quite know just how closely he observed them, but close enough to know what was going on, he then followed some of the men. So the men who come into the toilets, had their sexual encounter, went off again. He followed them back to their cars and wrote down the car registration numbers. And then sometime later, he had I think some kind of contact in the police force, and he managed to find their addresses from these car numbers. And then he actually went, this is about a year or two afterwards, went to interview them at their home addresses, entirely covertly. It was something completely different from what the study had been doing. He I don't know, something to do with health and children, something like that. Some excuse to go and interview the men about these issues. And what he discovered was that of the men who were coming into the toilets for these homosexual sexual encounters, probably 50% or so were living apparently normal lives, in other words, heterosexual lives, with wives back at home. And they were just coming to the only evidence of homosexuality in their lives was these visits to the tea room, the cottaging they got involved with. And in a sense, therefore, it was the first work that began to reveal that perhaps there was a lot more homosexuality going on than people realised, that a lot of homosexuals were covert, or maybe others were not wholly homosexual. And certainly he suggested in his work that a lot of these men weren't actually 100% homosexual, didn't live homosexual lives as such, didn't live with other men and so on, but rather just had these odd encounters and they went on. So a very different kind of situation from what you might imagine.
Okay, so what about that one, whether the researcher is covered or not? Covered. Yes, so it clearly says entirely covered, right? So during his speech, so he explanation, he mentioned several times. So the researcher is entirely covered. So nobody knew he's doing a research. Actually, he wanted to find out the homosexual men, right? So so therefore, the researcher stand around the entrance of the toilets, and he followed some of the men's, so maybe the men's cars, and he noted down their registered numbers of the cars. So sometimes back, so maybe 2-3 years back, so after recognizing their car numbers, so he managed to find out their addresses. So after maybe 2 years, he mentioned after maybe 2 years, so he went to that addresses and he interviewed these people, saying that he want maybe pretending that he is a kind of a insurance agent, right? So he just interviewed these people, right? So the finding was, the researcher at the beginning he observed, and later he interviewed, pretending that he's another person, something like he's like a insurance agent, right? So the finding was around 50% of men who come to the toilets for homosexual activity. So he found that around 50% of men have normal sexual life with their wives, right? Because so normally we believe that the homosexual men doesn't have a normal sexual life with their wives. But here, so after interviewing, right, because he pretended that he's an insurance agent. So if it is an insurance agent to cover the maybe life insurance, so he can ask certain questions. No, through the questions, he identified that the 50% of men have their normal sexual life with their wives, right? So therefore, he said that we cannot say 100% of the men who come to the toilets are homosexual people, right? So only because homosexual people means, so only they live with men, right? But he found that the 50% of the men live there with normal life with their wives as well. So you can see, so in qualitative research, so in ethnographic studies, so ethnographic studies comes under qualitative research. So you cannot predict your findings at the beginning, right? So you have a hunch, right? So maybe homosexual men doesn't have a life with their wives, but you can see the different findings he found from this study, right? So in this case, he covered himself, so he's entirely covered, right? So with compared to other two studies, right? Here,
Madam, excuse me.
Yes.
Hello.
Yes.
Madam, it is not ethical research, no? It is that convert research is can be considered as a ethical research.
Yes. So when you do this type of research, so researchers has to take ethical clearance, right? Ethical clearance. So after getting the ethical clearance, he can do that type of research. Okay.
So he has to get the legal permission for doing that like this.
Even not this type of thing. So even in foreign universities, foreign countries, when you do PhD studies or post doctoral studies, so you have to get ethical clearance from your about your study, because sometimes maybe you ask questions from participants. Sometimes it may hurt these people, right? So therefore, you have to get the clearance, ethical clearance for before you do the study.
Okay, thank you, madam. I got it.
Okay, so here actually I wanted to specify only one thing, that you have to identify whether the researcher is a covered person or a overt person. And also you should know how to do a ethnographic study, right? Ethnographic study. Right? So you can watch this one, this video from YouTube, right? So I have taken that one from YouTube. Okay. So those are foreign examples, right? Foreign examples, right? But you can study ethnographic studies in Sri Lanka like this, right? So these are some of the examples. So examine the lives of tea plantation workers, right? So you have to visit their, the plantation area, right? So, or you have to visit continuously, right? So you have to be with them, right? So you can find out their lifestyles using the ethnographic study. So it could explore their working conditions, family dynamics, cultural practices, and their relationships with the tea industry. Right? අපි දන්නවනේ තේදලු කඩන අය ගැන නේ. එතකොට මේ වගේ ethnographic study එකදී සමහරක් විට so we won't be able to pretend that we are a co-worker of that setting, but you can visit continuously, saying that you are a researcher and you can collect data, because if you go there continuously, so you will understand their behaviors, right? Their cultural practices, their family conditions, working conditions, family dynamics, like that, right? Then the other one, exploring Veda's traditional knowledge, cultural practices, relationship with the environment, and their experience of social change, right? So that is also kind of ethnographic study which we can do, right? So using Vedas, their knowledge, what are their practices, cultural practices, so how they treat the environment, right? ඒගොල්ලන් ගහ කොළ වලට සතුන්ට කොහොමද treat කරන්නේ ඒ වගේ. ඊළඟ එක බලන්න, Sri Lanka has a long history of traditional healing practices such as Ayurveda. An ethnographic study could explore the beliefs, rituals, and treatment methods employed by traditional healers, as well as their relationship with modern healthcare system. Right? අපි දන්නවනේ ඔය කැඩුම් බිඳුම් වෙච්ච වෙද මහත්තයලා ගැන, ඒගොල්ලන්ගේ traditional healing practices ගැන in-depth analysis එකක් study එකක් කරන්න පුළුවන්. ඒගොල්ලන්ගේ beliefs මොනවද, ඒගොල්ලන්ගේ rituals මොනවද, ඒගොල්ලන්ගේ මේ treatment methods මොනවද, ඒ treatments methods කොහොමද modern මේ systems එක්ක medicine එක්ක link වෙන්නේ කියන එක. මොකද දැන් ඒගොල්ලනුත් ඔයගොල්ලන් දන්නවා ඇති x-ray එකක් අරන් එන්න කියනවා නේ. බලන්න ඒ healing මොන හරි ඒ treatments කරාට පස්සේ කරන්න ඉස්සෙල්ලා x-ray ගන්න කියනවා. එතකොට ඒ වගේ අර in depth study එකක් අපි ඒ research setting එකටම involve වෙලා තමයි කරන්න ඕනේ. හරි, ඒවට අපි කියනවා ethnographic studies කියන. Right? Okay. So this is I was talking about the first data collection method using in qualitative research. So it's a participation observation or ethnography. So we normally call it as ethnographic studies. Then the second one is qualitative interviewing, right? To collect data, so you can use interviews, right? So there are different types of interviews that you can use. So in-depth interviews, semi or unstructured interviews. So these interviews, right, you can use in ethnographic studies also. That's why it says embedded in ethnography. So in ethnographic studies, so interview is a must thing, right? So you have to question the people. You have to ask from people to get their idea. So in ethnographic studies, so the qualitative interviews are there, but in interviews, there are different types of styles. So in-depth interviews, semi-structured, unstructured, so likewise. So in-depth interviews means, so when you ask a question, so you will get an answer. So through the answer, you will ask next question. So likewise, you go to the depth. Then semi-structured or unstructured means, so you have some sort of structure in your interview protocol. Then you ask the questions, right? So here also, so you don't have a structured questionnaire, but in quantitative studies, survey-based studies, so you have a right sequential order of questions, right? But in qualitative studies, so you have to ask questions based on the answers you get from the participants. So therefore, it's maybe semi-structured, maybe unstructured, right? So qualitative interviewing is one another data collection method. Then focus group, right? So focus group means, so you interview selecting a particular group, right? So for an example, so we'll say if you want to study the business of organs, right? So දන්නවනේ වකුගඩු වගේ organs මේ විකුණන මේකක් තියෙනවානේ. එතකොට so you cannot ask everyone about this. So you have to focus a group to get the information, right? So maybe you have to talk about with dealers, right? So the patients, right? So donors, right? Organ donors. So likewise, you have to focus on specific group, right? So from all the people, you cannot get it, right? So therefore, it's very important. So the focus group. So yes. So that is organ trade. So if you want to investigate on organ trade, so you have to interview different people. So maybe transplant surgeons, nurses, then the police officers, then kidney donors, kidney buyers, right? Organ brokers, right? So it's a kind of a focus group is there. Otherwise, you cannot get the information of that organ trade. So therefore, you focus on a group and get the information, right? So here it says it gives the researcher the ability to capture deeper information more economically than individual information, right? So from a group of people, you ask about their perceptions, opinions, beliefs, and attitudes towards particular concept, product, or service, right? Then the other one is disclosure or conversation analysis. So it's mainly language-based approaches that you used for qualitative data, because so you know, if you do a research in Jaffna, so you should know the language of Tamil language, right? So that type of things that you have to use in this method. Then documentary analysis. So there are different types of data collection methods used in qualitative research, but in your level, so you can use interviews, documentary analysis, and focus groups, right? So ethnography also you can use, but normally, so these things we don't use in this level, right? Okay. Okay. Then we'll study the process of qualitative approach. So you know the process of quantitative approach, right? So you know the process of quantitative. මේ කියන්නේ survey based approach එකක් ගැන ඔයගොල්ලන් දැන් දන්නවනේ steps ටික. So you start from theory, then you develop the hypothesis. Based on the hypothesis, you collect data. Then you have the findings. Then you reject or confirm your hypothesis based on your findings, right? So that is the process that you follow in quantitative studies, right? Survey-based study. But this is the qualitative research process, right? So you start from general research questions. So I told you in qualitative research, so at the beginning, you don't have exact research question that you want to study, right? So you start from research interest, right? So you start from the interest, right? Then you collect data. So then you develop your propositions, right? So you have a general research question, right? General research question. So we will study this one using an example. So therefore, take a separate paper and write down these things, right? So I'm going to explain the process using a case study, right? Using a case study, I will explain one by one, the each step using that case information, right? So please write down the first one, general research question. General research question. So write down the first one. So general research question, under that, right? You want to study, right? Study of crime in public houses. Study of crime in public houses. So that is our general research question.
Please repeat, madam.
So under general research question, so your first step is general research questions. Under that, write study of crime in public houses. Study of crime in public houses. Then the second step is selection of relevant sites and subjects, right? So selection of relevant site. So what is your main research question? Study of crime in public houses. So you have to select a research site, right? Where, so research site means where the research was conducted, right? Where the research was conducted. So that is your research site. So you have to select a research site which had a high level of crimes, right? You have to select a research site which had a high level of crimes, right? So otherwise you cannot answer to that research question because you want to study the crimes in public houses. So you have to select public houses where the crimes are happening, right? So crimes have occurred in the past. So research site means that, right? So based on the main research, general research question, you have to select the research site, right? So for an example, we'll take Maligavatta housing scheme, right? Example, Maligavatta housing scheme. So why you select Maligavatta housing scheme? So write down because which had a high level of crime. So because you heard that in Maligawath housing scheme, අපි නිවුස් වලින් දකිනවා නේ drugs සම්බන්ධයෙන් issues එතන දකිනවා මිනිස්සු මරා ගන්නවානේ ওই වගේ ගොඩක් දේවල් අපි දැන් දැකලා තියෙනවානේ අහලා තියෙනවා නිවුස් වලින් දැකලා තියෙනවා ඒකින්ද අපි ඒක තමයි research site එක හැටියට තෝරගන්න. Right? So why you select that one? Because which had a high level of crime and which shows housing features and which shows housing features that link with propensity to crime. Okay, which had a high level of crime and which shows housing features that link with propensity to crime. So that is the reason why you select Maligavatta housing scheme. Okay, so your general research question is study of crimes in public houses. So you have to select the research site. The second step is that. So therefore you selected Maligavatta housing scheme because Maligavatta housing scheme. So we know there are certain events occurred about crimes and also there are certain features which there is a tendency to have a crimes, right? Okay, so that is the second point. Then the third one, collection of relevant data. Collection of relevant data. So what are the methods that you can use to collect data? So you learned those methods. Collection of relevant data.
Interviews.
You can interview. Okay, so what else? So rather than interviews, you learn
That we have to go to the housing scheme.
Yes. So it's a kind of participation observation or ethnography, right? So ethnographic study, right? So collection of relevant data. So you can use ethnographic method. Under that, right? Ethnographic method. So that's mean you have to spend several months with the people in that research site. So spend several months with the people in the research site. And you have to get involved with many activities in that research site, right? Have to get involved with many activities. So you can involve with different societies because you want to get information. So you are maybe covering, you are a covered person, right? So the other people doesn't know that you are a researcher, right? So then you have to involve with activities. Then you will, you can build certain friendships with some people and you can get information, right? So you have to get involved with many activities in the site, right? So you can join with different societies. Then also you can carry out extended interviews. You can carry out extended interviews with who? Because your research question is study the crimes in public houses, right? So who are the people that you are going to interview? Who are the people? Carry out extended interviews with whom?
Like prisoners?
Prisoners? Yes, maybe the people who involved with maybe drug deals, rights, crimes, who maybe they are in prisons, right? You can interview them, right? So yes, you can interview the police, victims, residents, right? You can talk with residents, right? Residents, police officers, right? The people who are in prison, prisoners, then administrative officers, then make a housing scheme එකක් නේ. Okay, ඉන්නවනේ administration staff එකක් ඉන්න පුළුවන් නේ. Right? So administrative officers of the housing scheme. So you can talk with them. You can do extended interviews, right? So we call extended interviews. Again, you have to do more and more interviews with these people to get the information, right? Okay, so that is the third step, right? So you can do ethnographics method. You have to spend several months with them. So you have to involve with activities. You have to involve with so different societies, and so using participation observation, you can get certain information. On the other hand, you can interview different parties of this research site, right? So that is data collection methods. Then the fourth one is interpretation of data. Interpretation of data, right? So you know, in qualitative research, so we told you, right, at the beginning I told you, so this is inductive approach. So through the data, you derive certain concepts or theories. Through the data, you derive concepts or theories, right? First we derive concepts, right? Theory එකක් develop කරනවා කියන එක ලේසි නෑ. ගොඩාක් පාරක් ඔය concepts ඇවිල්ලා තමයි theory එකට එන්නේ, right? So first you derive the concepts, right? Through the data that you gathered, you come up with certain concepts, right? So interpretation of data. So one of the key findings emerge from the data is, right? So for an example, please write. So one of the key findings emerge from the data may be even though this site has high crime rate, residents may not treat it as a problem. Residents may not treat it as a problem, right? So through the interviews, maybe you found that, right? So even though you have crimes in this housing scheme, so residents don't bother about it, right? So residents don't consider it as a main problem. So maybe, so they have they have certain issues more than the crimes, right? Maybe they may raise, they have housing problems, housing conditions, maybe the main problems of residents, right? Rather than crimes, because maybe they have adapted to that situation. So crimes කියන ඒවා normal වෙලා ඇති ඒගොල්ලන්ට. So maybe when you interview them, they may come up with another issues. So they may raise, so we have issues like housing conditions, certain housing issues. අයිතිය දෙන්නේ නැහැ, කුලී ගෙවලා නැහැ, ඔය වගේ ප්‍රශ්න තියෙන්න පුළුවන්. එතකොට ඒව තමයි ඒගොල්ලන්ට තියෙන ප්‍රශ්න, right? So that is the main thing, right? So when you interpret the data, so one of the key findings emerge from the data may be, right, even though this housing scheme has high rate of crimes, residents do not consider this as a main problem, right? So their main concerns may be the housing issues, housing conditions, right? So that may be your main finding from this data interpretation, through the findings, right? So that is what interpretation of data. Then conceptual and theoretical work, right? So sometimes you may not find a new concept through this data, right? So sometimes through the data, after interpreting the data, you may not find a concept. So therefore, you have to collect more data. You have to collect further, right? You have to collect data further. So therefore, when you collect data further, right? So here there is an arrow, right? So because based on your research question, you collected data. But when you interpret the data, so you cannot come up with a certain concept. So therefore, you may need further data, or sometimes you may need to revise your research question, right? So once you revise your research question, so you have to collect further data. Then, so you can see there is a kind of an ongoing process, right? So it doesn't stop at this level. So if you cannot come up with certain concepts, right, you have to collect data more. You can have to collect data further. So that means sometimes you have to revise your research question, right? So then again, you interpret the data after collecting more data. So in this case, maybe you have to re-interview the officers, some residents again, right? Because actually you wanted to find one thing, but you found another thing. So therefore, you may need to re-interview the residents, re-interview the officers, re-interview maybe the prisoners or police. So likewise, so you have to collect data further by using further interviews, right? So that is the fifth step. Then the sixth one, write up findings and conclusion. Write up findings and conclusions. So there are no significant difference between quantitative write-ups and qualitative write-ups, right? So, but you have to be very careful when you write the qualitative research findings, because you have to write what you have seen, what you have heard, right? So you have to write that one. So what interviewees said, right? So what you saw. So those things you have to convert into words. So therefore you have to be very careful when you write your write-up in qualitative studies, right? So that's the process which you have to follow in qualitative research. Okay. Clear? Any questions? Clear? Any questions? Attendance. So here some students mentioned that you already done the attendance, right? So now the attendance sheet is not available, right? Here, please mark your attendance. So it's there. Okay. So you have to mark. So please mark. Okay. Any question regarding this process? So this is very important. So sometimes you may be tested with this at the examination. So you have to, so you will get a certain small scenario or a case study, and we will ask you to put that case study into this process, right? So therefore you have to be very, you should have thorough knowledge about this process, right? Okay. So let's move to next one, theory building and theory testing, right? So there is two things, theory building and theory testing. So actually here, what I want to emphasize is, right? So you know at the beginning also I told you in qualitative research, what you do is you don't test a theory. You don't test a theory, you build a theory, right? So through the data, you build a concept and later on you build a theory. But actually in practice, right? In practice, right? So most of the qualitative researchers also use theory testing, right? Use theory testing, right? In qualitative research also, you can use theory testing, right? So here it says, most qualitative researchers, when writing about their craft, emphasize the preference of treating theory as something that emerges out of the collection and analysis of data. So that is grounded theory. So this is what you learn, right? So this is the actual theoretical thing happen, right? But some qualitative researchers argue that qualitative data can and should have an important role in relation to testing of theories as well. So that's mean when you do a qualitative study, so sometimes you can start from a theory, right? So you can start with a theory. So that's mean you connect, you are issued to a particular theory. So for an example, you can connect institutional theory to some sort of research issue. So for an example, if you want to study what are the factors influence on environmental management accounting implementation. So factors influence on environmental management accounting practices, right? So for that, you can use the theory as institutional theory, right? So you don't derive a theory from that, but you can use a theory to test your research issue. So that is we call theory testing, which you use basically in survey-based research. But in qualitative research also, in practically, so you can use theory testing as well, right? Even though at the beginning also I told in qualitative research, we don't test theory. But in practice, we use certain theories to check our research issue, right? So that is, you have to clarify. So actually, අපි අර තද මොකද්ද කොහොමද කියන්නේ ඒක අපි අර theoretically ඉගෙන ගන්න දෙයක් හැටියට අපි ඒක කියනවා in qualitative research අපි theory එක build කරනවා මිසක් theory එක test කරන්නේ නැහැ කියලා. නමුත් අපි ප්‍රැක්ටිස් එකට යනකොට ප්‍රැක්ටිකලි කරනකොට හුඟක් රිසර්චර්ස්ලා මේ ටෙස්ට් කරන එකක් තියරි ටෙස්ට් කරන එකක් ක්වලිටේටිව් රිසර්ච් වල කරනවා. හරි ඒකයි එතන කියන්නේ. හරි. එතකොට අපිට උනා වුණත් රිසර්ච් එකක් කරනකොට තියරි එකක් අරගෙන ඒක ක්වලිටේටිව්ලි ටෙස්ට් කිරීමක් කරන්න පුළුවන්. Okay. So these are the approaches that you use for reliability and validity, right? So because you know in quantitative research, did you study how to establish reliability and validity? Did you study that one? In survey-based research or quantitative research? Ajit sir or Kennedy sir explain how to establish reliability and validity in survey-based research? එහෙම එකක් ඉගෙන ගත්තද? අර conbatch alpha කියලා එකකින් ඒක ටෙස්ට් කරන්න පුළුවන් කියන එක ඉගෙන ගත්තද? Yes or no? එහෙම එකක් ඉගෙන ගත්තද නැද්ද? conbatch alpha කියන එකක් ඉගෙන ගත්තද?
No, madam.
නෑ. එහෙනම් උගලන් පස්සේදී ඒක ඉගෙන ගනි. So in survey-based research, to establish reliability and validity, you have to test conbatch alpha, right? So when you use SPSS or certain statistical packages, so once you feed your data, so you can find out whether your data has a reliability or validity, right? So using now, considering a number, you can establish whether this data has a reliable, whether this data is reliable or valid, right? But in qualitative research, you know, we always deal with words, right? So not numbers. So therefore, to establish reliability and validity, we use different approaches. So first one is external reliability, means degree to which a study can be replicated, right? So in quantitative studies, survey-based studies වල අපිට replicate කරන්න පුළුවන්. But in qualitative studies, you cannot replicate. You cannot replicate because, you know, if we have studied in, so maybe you have, when you review literature, so you found a particular article which did their study in maybe in a foreign country, we'll say in Australia, right? So their setting, social setting is different from our culture. So therefore, external reliability means whether you can replicate this study or not, right? So Australian condition එක මෙහි social setting එකත් එක්ක ගැලපෙන්නේ නැහැ, right? So external reliability කියන්නේ ඒක. Internal reliability කියලා කියන්නේ, right? So when there is more than one observer, members of the research team agree about what they see and hear, right? So if all of the team members agree, then we say there is an internal reliability, right? More than one observer කියනවා නම් මේක එකම අදහස, then internal reliability එකක් තියෙනවා කියනවා. Internal validity කියන්නේ whether there is a good match between researchers' observation and theoretical ideas, right? So I told you sometimes you can test a theory, right? So as I explained earlier, so if you want to EMA adoption using institutional theory, so if you can relate institutional theory with the findings, so then there is an internal validity. So likewise, you can establish internal, reliability and validity using these type of things, right? External reliability, internal reliability, internal validity, and external validity. So external validity means degree to which findings can be generalized. But you know, in qualitative research, you cannot generalize the findings because the findings only relate to specific case, right? So those are the things that you have to follow when you adopt the reliability and validity of qualitative research. So you have to check whether there is external reliability, internal reliability, internal validity, and external validity. So that is one thing, right? Approaches to establish reliability and validity. And the other one is, other criteria is trustworthiness. So trustworthiness, under trustworthiness, we use one method, we call it as triangulation, right? So triangulation, so if you know about triangulation, that's enough. So under trustworthiness, so there is a method called triangulation. So triangulation means when you collect data from different methods, if all methods says the same idea, then we say there is a reliability, right? So the validity, right? So you can establish reliability and validity using triangulation. So there are several types of triangulation methods. So observer triangulation, data triangulation, methodological triangulation, and theoretical triangulation. So in simply, if we take data triangulation, right? So that means you can collect data using questionnaires. You can collect data using interviews. You can collect data through observations, right? Also, documentary analysis. So we'll say you collect data on questionnaire and you collect data from interviews. If both methods says the same thing, so then say, so there is a data triangulation. You can establish the validity and reliability using that, right? There is a data triangulation. So that is we call triangulation. So under trustworthiness, right? So we use this method. So mostly in qualitative research, we use triangulation as the data validation tool, right? Okay. Okay, so these things you can actually read and understand. Then I want to cover another point, right? So we can finish quickly that part. So please read these things, right? So you can understand easily these things. What are the preoccupations, right? So please read, all the information are there. Then we'll move to the sampling methods, right? Sampling methods. So sampling in qualitative research, right? Sampling in qualitative research. So actually a few things that I want to emphasize here. So in survey-based research, right? So there is an emphasis on what? So what is the sampling method that you use in survey-based research? මොකක්ද method එක? Survey-based research? So can you please ask Kalhari if you can't mark attendance? So please talk to Kalhari, right? So don't disturb during the lecture, right? So you have given a time to mark the attendance. So I announced it, right? So you have to comply with those things, right? So then later on, so we can't discuss those things, right? So in survey research, so there is an emphasis on which sampling? Probability sampling. In qualitative research, tend to emphasize the importance of purposive, right? So it's mainly focus on the particular case, right? Qualitative researchers tend to emphasize the importance of their particular case study, right? The case, right? So you have to write that one. Give me 1 minute. In qualitative research, the aim is to have the sample represent the entire population, right? Here, purposive, importance of purposive. Then in qualitative research, the sample is drawn up to make sure that the specific types of cases are included. The specific types of, here you can see the answers, right? In survey-based research, we mainly emphasize probability sampling, but in qualitative research, we focus on purposive sampling, right? So we don't go with probability sampling because we specifically decide our research site and purposively we select the participants. In survey-based research, you consider the entire population, which represent the sample, right? In qualitative research, the sample is drawn up to make sure that the specific types of cases are included. Hence, the sample is prepared purposively, right? The sample is prepared purposively, right? So what you have to remember here is, in quantitative studies, you go with probability sampling. In qualitative studies, it is purposive sampling. Why? Because you select a particular research site to study your research issue. So therefore, so you select purposively the participant, right? Then what is the purposive sampling, right? So the form of sampling typically used in qualitative research, it's a non-probability form of sampling, right? So, so since you select specifically for well, for your research site, so it's not random, right? It's not random. Then why you choose for purposive sampling? Because researcher select his sampler with his research goal in mind, right? Because so when you select the research sample, so you should have the research question in your mind. So having the research question in your mind, so you select the sample, right? So that's why it's a purposive, right? So not possible to extrapolate results to general population. Make a generalize karana bad. Important to have clear and specific criteria to determine inclusion and exclusion of units of analysis, right? So those are the important points about purposive sampling. So there are different types of sampling methods, purposive sampling methods, right? So theoretical sampling. Theoretical sampling means so it's a kind of a form of a purposive sampling, and data collection you do to generate a theory, right? So under theoretical sampling, so you collect data to generate a theory, right? So that means the grounded theory. So in other words, grounded theory, right? So therefore, the data collection is controlled by the emerging theory, right? So once you found a theory or a concept, so you stop data collection, right? So therefore, the data collection controlled by emerging theory, right? So the crucial characteristic of this type of theoretical sampling is that it's an ongoing process, right? Because so until you find a concept or a theory, you collect data. So therefore, it's a ongoing process. So maybe here the people sometimes as cases, you may find people, you may select the places, maybe some events. So you can consider those things as your cases, right? So the most important thing is, so it's a iterative or it's a ongoing, right? Iterative, it's a continuous process, right? So another important point is in theoretical sampling, so theoretical saturation is very important. Theoretical saturation as a criteria for deciding when to stop collecting data, right? On a particular theoretical idea and to move to another new idea, right? So in theoretical sampling, so theoretical saturation is very important. So theoretical saturation means, so in next slide, you can see, so you collect data from a particular research issue. So if you cannot find a particular concept, right? So you stop collecting data. So that point we call as theoretical saturation point. So if you cannot derive a particular concept or a theory using the data that you have derived, right? So at that point, you stop collecting data. So that point we call as theoretical saturation point, right? So that is very important, right? So in theoretical sampling, so theoretical saturation point is very important, right? Okay. Then the next one, generic purposive sampling. So here also you do the sampling purposively, right? So but here you don't expect to generate a theory, right? So your sample is mostly fixed. In this case, in generic purposive sampling, your sample is mainly fixed, right? So based on the research question, you select your research sites or cases, right? So here you have certain steps to follow. So you under genetic purposes sampling, first you have to select cases to address your research question. Then you have to identify appropriate cases, then select the sample through those cases, right? So those are the steps that you have to follow, right? So sample size is fixed. So these are the steps that you have to follow. First, you have to select few cases based on your research question, then identify appropriate case for your research question, then select sample from those cases, right? So that is we call generic purposive sampling. Then the other one is snowball sampling. So this is very easy. So snowball sampling means, so initially you select a small group of people, and you interview them, right? Then through the interview, so they may tell you, so it is better to go with them and ask questions, right? So then you go to the next layer, right? Next group, right? So based on the first group, so you got an idea about the next group. Then you go to the next group. Then the second group also, you get certain information, and second group also says, so you to get a better idea, so you better go to this group. Then you go to the third group also. So likewise, you get the information. So as I mentioned earlier, so under the organ trade, right? So you can collect different types of information from different players in that organ trade case, right? So ඔයගලන්ට පුළුවන් ඒවා brokers ලගෙන් පුළුවන්, ඒවා donors ලගෙන් පුළුවන්, right? So snowball sampling කියන්නේ මේ different අයගෙන් අපිට ගන්න පුළුවන්. දැන් ඩොක්ටර් කෙනෙක්ගෙන් ගියාම ඩොක්ටර් කියනවා ඔයා නර්ස් මේ නර්ස් කෙනුත් මේක ඇහුවොත් හොඳයි. එතකොට නර්සස් ලාගෙන් ගිහින් ක්වෙස්චන් කරනකොට එයා කියනවා මේ patients ලාගෙනුත් අහන්න. එතකොට patients ලා කියනවා මම මෙයාගෙන් තමයි මේ බ්‍රෝකර්ගෙන් තමයි contact කරගත්තේ. එහෙම කී අපි කීප දෙනෙක්ව මේකට සම්බන්ධ කරගන්නවා. snowball sampling කියන්නේ හරි. ඔය samples තුන තමයි ඔයගලන් දැනගන්න ඕනේ. So theoretical sampling, then generic purposive sampling, and snowball sampling, right? So all these things comes under purposive sampling. So when you do a qualitative research, so other important point is, so how to decide your sample size, right? So it's very difficult to tell. So this is this much of people that you have to interview, right? So we can't exactly say. But in theoretically, so some researcher says, so minimum number of 20 to 30 is enough for as your sample, but it's depend on the research issue, right? So exactly we can't say 20 people enough, 30 people is enough, right? So therefore, it's very important. So when you collect data, the theoretical saturation point is very important. So therefore, based on that, you have to collect data, right? So that's what I want to emphasize about sampling methods, right? Okay, so that's all. Any questions regarding about the sampling? So we teach you very basic things, right? Because these topics are very deep topics, but to do your project, so the things which we explain is enough, right? So under sampling, so you should know theoretical sampling, generic purposes sampling, and snowball sampling, right? So study only those things, right? So the theoretical saturation also very important. That's enough. But when you if you do a PhD or study, so you have to study in depth more than this, right? Okay, so if you don't have any questions, we can stop at this level. Everything clear? Shall we stop? Maybe you have another session, right? Okay. Shall we stop? Okay, students, I'll end the session. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you,
Ma'am.
madam.